Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final speaker session of our 2017 Air, Space, and Cyber Conference. This conference has been one of our best yet, packed with expert speakers who have delivered relevant and timely information on the current issues, the state of our Air Force, and the future of the national security as a whole. Unfortunately, sometimes duty calls, and 3 of our COCOM commanders who were scheduled to speak on this panel are no longer able to attend. However, we are thrilled to have the opportunity to hear from the commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, General John Hyten. As many of you know, it is our combatant commands in which the law places the mission of executing operations, protecting our nation's security interests, while our Air Force as a military department is charged with organizing, training, and equipping our forces. It is with our combatant commands that the responsibility for fighting and winning rests. Our speaker this afternoon is responsible for the global command and control of U.S. strategic forces to meet decisive national security objectives. He provides a broad range of strategic capabilities and options to the President and the Secretary of Defense. It is a privilege to introduce the Commander of the United States Strategic Command, General John Hyten.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hello, General Everhart. How are you? Good afternoon, everybody. I was wondering if anybody's going to show up. So I see General Cotton. You got to have General Boussier. That's good. A bunch of missileers and aviators over there. Well done. You know, I used to think the worst slot. God, hello, Dash. How are you? I thought the worst slot in the AFA symposium had to be the slot after the Chief of Staff. And twice I've been in that slot. But now I get this slot. But the good news was I had my buddies coming with me. So General McDougall, General Robinson, General Brown, they're all going to be here. It's going to be a good time. We'd stand up here, we'd talk about what's going on in the world. Wouldn't have a lot of prep. And then like 2 days ago, General Robinson, I'm not going to make it. General Brown, I'm not going to make it. General Brown, you're on your own, man. Have a good time. Talk for an hour, everybody will love it. So it is great to be here. I tell you one thing, I never for the life of me thought I would grow up and be the commander of Strategic Command. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. It can't happen. A blind kid from Alabama that doesn't fly an airplane can't grow up and be the commander of U.S. Strategic Command. It's just not possible. But it did. And so the greatest thing I get to do every day is I get to command an organization that has 184,000 of the finest Americans that you can ever come across. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. And I get to do it. And the best days, believe it or not, are not days like today when I get to come and stand up in front of a bunch of people and talk. The best days by far is when I get to go to F.E. Warren and see General Cotton, and I get to go out in the missile fields, or I get to go to Barksdale and see the men and women at Barksdale and look at 8th and 20th together underneath Global Strike Command and understand what they're doing. That's the best part of the job. The best part of the job is getting underway under the Atlantic in the USS Tennessee, or being in a nuclear submarine in France and England, in the Pacific, doing a change of command on top of the USS Jacksonville. Airmen just don't get to do that, but I've got to. So I feel very lucky to be where I am. But oh my gosh, we live in a crazy world, as General Rand said yesterday. So let me talk a little bit about U.S. Strategic Command from an airman's perspective first, and then we'll walk into the joint world. Because we are among airmen, so it's great to be home. Next chart. So let's talk about U.S. Strategic Command. Let's talk about it from a history perspective. So 1946, not U.S. Strategic Command, but Strategic Air Command. SAC was born in 1946. And who was the first commander of Strategic Air Command? Not that guy. First commander was George Kenney, another hero of World War II, hero of the Pacific. Amazing. But the command was not in Nebraska at that time. It was Curtis LeMay who brought the command to Omaha, Nebraska, in 1948. And he was the commander from 1948 to 1957. And that is a capture of the painting that's on the wall outside my office. And I want you to look real close at that, and you can't see it really, but if you can move around in the back, because I walk by it every day, one of the things that is really interesting about that picture is the artist who painted that picture figured out how to paint it so that his eyes follow you wherever you go. And so as I walk in the morning, he's looking left, looking at me, saying, what the hell are you going to do today? And as I walk across, I look back and he's looking back. And as I come out in the evening, he looks right and he says, how'd you do today? That's the legacy of Strategic Command. The legacy of Strategic Command is Strategic Air Command. It is SAC. That is our legacy. But that is not who we are. If you want to find SAC in the United States Air Force, you need to go to Barksdale. That's where SAC is. SAC is Global Strike Command. That is, and I sat next to General Rand on the MADSCOM panel at the last phase of the AFA symposium, I think 2 years ago now, and he was asked what it felt like to come back and be the commander of Global Strike Command. He picked up the microphone and he said 3 words, SAC is back, and he dropped the mic. But it was exactly right. That's what that command is. But it's not our command. But the first change that happened in Strategic Air Command was 1961. 1961 was important because it was Curtis LeMay who looked out across the nuclear force, and he realized that we need to be joint when it comes to employing the nuclear capabilities of the United States, and we need to be joint, and we need to integrate the naval capabilities that you find in our nuclear submarines into that force. And so I went back and read the vision for a lot of, or his vision for a lot of reasons. The history was dug out. And Curtis LeMay's vision was a unified command for our nuclear capabilities in 1961. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to have a joint command exercising our nuclear capabilities. But the Navy didn't want to go that way. And because of that, we created a Band-Aid called the JSTPS, Joint Strategic Target and Planning Staff, a staff to integrate, and that's where the Single Integrated Operational Plan, the SIOP, came from. That's our history. And that lasted that way for 30 years. And then in 1992, the vision of LeMay was actually achieved with the creation of U.S. Strategic Command, where all the joint forces came together to execute the nuclear mission. But then, 10 years later, when U.S. Space Command was stood down, space came into Stratcom. Then cyber came into Stratcom, and missile defense, and ISR, electronic warfare, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, all came in to U.S. Strategic Command. And we created a series of subordinate commanders in order to manage those pieces. And so today, you see still a very powerful command. The amazing thing, it is the most powerful command in the world. And a lot of my peers joke when I say that, but there's no other nation on the world that integrates everything in one command like we do. All the strategic nuclear capabilities, the space capabilities, currently the cyber capabilities, missile defense, all in one command. There's only one command that does that. That's our command. So it's a pretty amazing history. But the one thing I brought back, which is unbelievably important to me, and it should be important to every airman in this audience, is the motto that's at the top. Because the motto at the top is the one thing that is consistent since the beginning of Strategic Air Command. Peace is our profession. That defines who we are, and that applies to every mission in U.S. Strategic Command. But if you noticed, there's 3 dots at the end of Peace is our profession. And the 3 dots are there for a reason. And it is because legend has it, and I've heard it often enough from enough people that I believe it to be truth, so I'll state it as truth even though I have no proof, is that Curtis LeMay, when the motto was brought to him, said, I really like Peace is our profession, but I want a ... at the end, because the ... at the end will mean to everybody in the world that if you cross that line, you need to know that the United States is coming and we're coming big. That's what the ... means. So if you look over here and you see the gentleman sitting right here in this room, the commander of 8th Air Force, Tom Boussier, the commander of 20th Air Force, Tony Cotton, they're the ... They're ready every minute of every day. Next chart. So I'm a big believer in mission type orders. I don't like commanders who think they can execute the detailed mission of their component commands. So I publish a commander's intent, and I expect every member of the 184,000 people in our command to have read that commander's intent and understand it. It's unclassified. You can pull it off the web. Anybody can read it. And in that document right up front, you'll find the mission and vision of U.S. Strategic Command, so I ask you to read them right there. And I'll just tell you right up front, I don't like the mission statement. So why in the heck would the commander publish in his commander's intent a mission statement that he doesn't like? And the answer is, that's exactly what we do. That's why it's our mission. So our mission is to provide tailored nuclear, space, cyber, global strike, electronic warfare, missile defense, intelligence capabilities. That's what the UCP tells us to do, and we do that. But today we do every one of those in its own stovepipe. Even nuclear and global strike, in many cases, are stovepiped off of each other. The conventional global strike mission is separate from the nuclear. Space is separate from everything. Cyber is separate from everything. Missile defense is separate from everything. And we are U.S. Strategic Command, and we deliver the strategic capabilities of the nation. You heard General Spencer describe my responsibilities, but nonetheless, we do it in 7 stovepipes. So the vision of my command is one team, one war-fighting team, innovative, joint, providing the integrated multi-domain combat capabilities that we need as a nation. And we have all those missions in right now. And cyber's about to leave, but we still have all those strategic missions. And we'll be successful as a command when we can integrate them together. And the effects that we provide will be at the time and place that is right, and we'll be able to seamlessly integrate all those capabilities together. That's what we're moving towards. That's our vision. Next chart. So look at the threats we deal with. So the threats we deal with are on that chart. It's the 4+1 that every uniformed person in here is familiar with. So let's think about what our adversaries are doing and how it impacts U.S. Strategic Command. Russia. Last year, Russia, in the fall, did the largest strategic force deployment and exercise that they have done since the Cold War ended. The largest by far. Significant percentage of their long-range aviation, significant percentage of their mobile rocket forces, significant percentage of their submarine launch forces, all integrated together and providing a capability. At the same time, they did a civil defense exercise involving 40 million Russian citizens. 40 million Russian citizens. You can't hide a civil defense exercise of 40 million Russian citizens. So when's the last time in the United States you even remember that annoying emergency thing come across your television or the radio anymore? You don't even see that anymore. But the adversary, and they announced it as a response to a strategic attack from the West, exercised 40 million citizens, which means every Russian citizen basically was involved in that exercise. That's how one of our adversaries is thinking about our business. China. All you have to do is read what China's been writing for 20 years and you understand what they're doing. China said 20 years ago that in order to counter the United States of America, we're going to have to figure out how to integrate our strategic capabilities. So when China does a strategic exercise, they integrate nukes, space, cyber, and conventional to achieve an overall strategic effect, both from a deterrent and a response aspect. They look at it all together, and they've written that way for 20 years. They've told us exactly what they're going to do. They're putting all those pieces together. They just stood up a brand new command in the PLA. The command is called the Strategic Support Force. In the Strategic Support Force is space, counterspace, electronic warfare, cyberspace, under all one command in order to achieve the strategic effect they need to do to support their strategic deterrent element. Why are Russia and China thinking that way? It's simple, because they've been watching us. They've been watching us since the first Gulf War. They've watched us create the most dominant conventional force in the history of the planet. And they looked at it and said, how did they do that? Can we counter that threat directly? And the answer was, we can't counter it directly, but we can counter it strategically. We can counter it in nukes, space, cyber, electronic warfare. That's where we can counter the advantage the United States has built. And so they're going down that path. And they haven't hidden it. They've said it out loud. They've said it in speeches. Vladimir Putin said in 2006, we're going to modernize 70% of our nuclear force by the end of the decade. And whether they get there or not, you can ask General Jameson whether they get there or not, but at the end of the decade, they're going to be a long way there, and we're going to still be sitting at 0% because we won't have started our modernization programs. North Korea. I'm sure everybody on this stage has talked about North Korea this week. But the thing about North Korea is they're moving fast. And 2 years ago, I kept getting questions about the fool in North Korea that was just blowing up missiles. And it scared the heck out of me when I started getting those questions. The reason is because when I started in the space program, which was, yes, a very long time ago, we were blowing up missiles too. General Schriever, who we'll talk about at the end of the speech, when he first started down the Corona program, building the first overhead spy satellite, blew up or failed 13 times in a row before he succeeded. Imagine doing that today. But North Korea is going fast. Iran, the JICPOA is holding right now on the nuclear side, but they're building ballistic missiles all over the place. Short range, medium range, long range, space range, all kinds of things are going that way. And we have this violence extremism threat that is there, it's going to be there, it's something that we have to be concerned about all the way through, and everything we do in Strategic Command has to be there to support all those threats. That's the environment we deal in. Next. So, November the 3rd, last year, I showed up at Offutt. A day that you never think is going to come. A day you become a combatant commander in the United States military. My family's there. Everybody's there. Friends from every assignment I've had. Chairman, Secretary of Defense. 10 o'clock in the morning, the change happen. 11 o'clock, it's over. Noon, I walk into the Doherty Conference Center at Offutt to meet with all my commanders. And I look around the giant table, and the giant table has every commander that works for me, down to a couple of colonels, Navy captains, that are at the end of the table because they work directly for me. And then I look at the agenda, and every one of those commanders around the table has a speaking role, with the exception of the 4-star Navy Admiral Phil Davidson to my left, and the 2 Air Force 4-stars, General Robin Rand and General Jay Raymond to my right, who don't have speaking roles because they're not operational components to Stratcom. All the other commanders around the table are their operational components. And the other thing that struck me was, holy cow, all those components actually work for these 4-stars. Why can't I just turn to the 4-star and say, what the heck's going on? How come I don't have a warfighting structure? Because Stratcom, even though we're listed as a functional combatant command in the Unified Command Plan, Stratcom is the ultimate warfighting command. It is our nation's ultimate power, and it is a warfighting command from beginning to end. So how come we aren't organized as a warfighting command? How come we have functional components all the way through? How come we have standing nuclear task forces across the board that work directly for me? Because if you have an organization like this, guess where the only integration happens in that command? In my office. And I don't know about you, but I'm not smart enough to command an organization like that. I just can't do it. And I want an organization that is organized for warfighting. So, on June the 16th, we pull the trigger. And here's the new organization, Stratcom. Everybody see an organization like that before? It's really not that difficult. On the 30th of September, we'll achieve IOC of the new air component. The air component is going to be General Robin Rand, the Commander of Global Strike Command. He'll have an AOC that works for him, and he'll have a direct coordinating authority with the tanker and airlift business at the 618th AOC, just like we do in every other warfighting theater. And when I need an air solution or a missile solution to a problem, I will look to one commander to give me that one solution. That means I want an integrated bomber tanker solution. I want an integrated ICBM solution. I want an integrated solution from the air component. That's the way it's going to work. We're going to have a 4-star maritime component. We'll take our time working through that because the task forces we have right now work just fine, but the Navy agrees they would like to have a single maritime component under Stratcom. We're going to have a space component because space is big in this, and the space component is not going to be subordinate. It's going to be the 4-star space commander, and that is General J. Raymond, and we'll put the joint forces under him. And then we have missile defense. Because one of the interesting things about Strategic Command, and I use the word interesting because it can be defined any way you want it to be defined, is that I have some very unique responsibilities when it comes to missile defense. I, the Commander Stratcom, am the coordinating authority from all the combatant commanders for missile defense. That's why I have a joint functional component for integrated missile defense. I'm also the approval for operational tests and the certification authority for any missile defense system that is delivered. A combatant command certifies systems before they can deploy. I think that's a service responsibility, but somehow it's assigned to Stratcom. So in the BMDR, we're going to address this issue, but until then, I will have a missile defense component because I have to be able to execute those responsibilities. But basically, look at that. And then if you lay the service component on top of that, son of a gun, they're the same people. What do you know? Just like we have almost everywhere that airmen operate. Just like we have almost everywhere that sailors operate. Just like we have everywhere that soldiers operate. That is the way we organize for warfighting. And if you're in a warfighting command, that's how you should be organized, and that's the way we're going to go. Next chart. So I have 3 priorities in my commander's intent. Those 3 priorities are quite simple. So I run through them fairly quick. Priority number 1, above all else, we will provide strategic deterrence. Next. Priority number 2, if deterrence fails, we will deliver a decisive response, and we'll do that in a way that means everything that those words say. And priority 3 is we'll do it with a combat-ready force, resilient, equipped, trained, and ready, a combat-ready force. And the interesting thing about Stratcom is every time I say that, and everybody in this room, probably 90% of you, as soon as I said strategic deterrence, decisive response, combat-ready force, you went to the nuclear mission in your mind. And that's where you should start. But that's not where you finish. Because those 3 priorities apply to every mission in U.S. Strategic Command. So if war extends into space, no, by the way, there is no such thing as war in space, there's just war. But if it extends into space, then we need to be able to ideally deter that from happening. If that doesn't work, we'll provide a decisive response, and that decisive response may or may not be in space, but it will be decisive. And we'll do it with a combat-ready force of combat-ready airmen that are trained to operate in the denied environment that space has become. It applies to cyber, it applies to missile defense, it applies to electronic warfare. It applies to every mission in U.S. Strategic Command. But somehow, we only think about strategic deterrence from a nuclear perspective. So we have a problem there. And the airmen in this room need to start thinking about that problem. And the problem is that strategic deterrence in the 21st century does not equate to 20th century deterrence. The fact that we have 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear weapons under the New START Treaty, and the fact that the Russians have 1,550 weapons on the New START Treaty, does not provide the total strategic deterrence of our nation. Strategic deterrence in the 21st century involves any strategic attack on the United States, and that strategic attack can now come through space, come through cyberspace. And if you think that's not true, imagine a world where through cyberspace we lose our entire electrical grid. Through space we lose all of GPS that is for the world. If we lose GPS, we lose the ability to get gas out of gas stations. We lose the ability to get money out of the ATM. We lose the ability to go to the bank. We lose the ability for stoplights to work. You have pure chaos in the world. We have to defend against those attacks. That is a strategic attack with a strategic effect. We have to figure out how to do that. But if war extends into space, the response may not be space. But it needs to be strategic, and we have to figure out what that really means. This is a multipolar world we live in, not a bipolar world like it was in the Cold War. When it's a bipolar world, all you have to worry about is your actions. What do the Soviets think about your action? When you're in a multipolar world, everybody watches you everywhere. Any action we take in the Northwest Pacific today impacts multiple nations. Anything we do in Europe impacts multiple nations. Everything we do in CENTCOM is watched by the entire world. It is a multipolar, multi-domain problem, and strategic deterrence is fundamentally different than it was last century. And we have to figure out how to talk about that. We have to figure out what that means. Because our job is to be able to provide the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States strategic options to deal with in our most difficult times. And those strategic options need to cross the spectrum of what we can do as a nation. Next. So a lot of people ask me, what worries you the most? What keeps you up at night? It seems to be a favorite question for the Commander of Strategic Command. Because I think everybody expects me to go right to talk about Kim Jong-un and North Korea. Or maybe I go and talk about Russia. What I talk about is that I'm very concerned that our nation has lost the ability to go fast. And that we have adversaries now, and we see proof in those adversaries that they're going faster than we are. Faster than we are on nuclear modernization. Faster than we are on building hypersonic glide vehicles and hypersonic deployed weapons that are very difficult to counter. Faster than us in space. Faster than us in building counter space capabilities to deny space. Faster than us in cyber. So I ask myself, how is that possible? Because one of the greatest strengths of our country, one of the greatest strengths of our Air Force, one of the greatest strengths about the entire joint force we operate in is we've always been able to leverage the industrial base and go faster than anybody else in the world. And now we're not. We are not. Other people are going faster than us. So I went back and I looked at the beginning of the Navy nuclear program. And I looked at Rickover. And then I went back and I looked at Schriever, who's one of my heroes. And the interesting thing about Schriever is that, I think everybody in here knows General Schriever, but my guess is very few people in this audience know General Phillips. And if you want to know who was the key to Minuteman I, all you need to do is ask General Schriever, and he'd tell you it was Sam Phillips. Because the Minuteman I program was structured by a small number of airmen in a little red schoolhouse in Los Angeles in 1957, initiated by Congress in 1958 with $214 million of appropriation, and then $2 billion of appropriations for the next 5 years. And when we got to 1964, we had invented a 3-stage solid rocket ICBM with a very similar capability that we have today in the Minuteman III. We deployed it at 5 Air Force bases across the country in 800 brand new missile holes with brand new infrastructure, with brand new nuclear command and control across the board, brand new copper cables that went all the way across the Midwest in order to hook everything together, nuclear hardened, EMP certified, all those capabilities, 5 years, total cost in today's dollars, $17 billion. And today, our program, the GBSD program, IOC 2029, FOC 2035, 400 3-stage solid rocket ICBMs, refurbishment of missile holes. The nuclear command and control is a separate budget. Total cost estimate right now, $84 billion. Slow, expensive, that's the way it is. So when I've said that now for a few times this summer, trying to get people's attention, and it has been reported in the newspaper that I have trashed the acquisition community, or I have criticized the test community, or I'm criticizing Congress and the budget process. Only one is ever reported. What I'm actually doing is I'm criticizing the entire process. And it starts with the budget. If you don't have a budget, if you want to know why General Schriever was successful, General Schriever was successful because, number one, he had simple requirements. Everybody understood what they were. On the first of the year, every year, he got his full budget. If he needed more money, he went back and he got more money. He was able to structure the program accordingly. He also had Sam Phillips, who was the program manager of Minuteman I. Sam Phillips understood what it took to go fast. He understood what it took to take a risk. He understood how to take smart risk. He understood that failure was part of the process and we needed to fail every once in a while in order to move forward. He understood that integrating 3 stages together and firing it off for the first time is actually not any riskier than doing it one at a time, as long as you understand how each one of those things work. Why is that important in our nation's history? If somebody knows Sam Phillips in this audience, you don't know him for the Minuteman I. Why is Sam Phillips most famous, in my opinion? Sam Phillips, in 1964, was pulled, kicking and screaming, from General Schriever to go manage the Apollo program for NASA. He's the one that convinced Werner Braun that it was okay to stack 3 stages together and launch it, because he's seen it in the Minuteman I, and yes, it's risky, but it's no more risky than taking them one at a time and then putting them together and finding there. And he said, and oh, by the way, that's the only way we'll get to the moon by the end of the decade. And he was given the authority and responsibility to execute that program as a 1-star Air Force general assigned to NASA. He was given that as a colonel and a 1-star for General Schriever to execute the Minuteman I program. We gave authority and responsibility, we put it in the right place, and we said go, and go fast. The test program was structured so that we would understand the test, but we understood what development test was and operation test was, and we didn't just duplicate it because we could duplicate it. We did it one time, and then we deployed a capability. I look at our industry today. People think I am insulting industry when I talk about that. I work with industry. Industry has the ability to go as fast as we want them to go, as fast as we tell them to go. If we give them good contracts, good incentives, they will go fast. If we don't, they won't. It's really that simple. You go back to our history, the history of airmen in the United States Air Force. You go back to Major General Schriever on the cover of Time magazine in 1957. You go back to Brigadier General Sam Phillips, who both of them became 4-star generals before they retired. Both of them in the same job, interestingly enough. The commander of Systems Command, Material Command now is where they both finished their career. That's our legacy as airmen. This is our legacy as the Joint Force. This is our legacy as a nation. We have the ability, if we want to go fast. All we have to do is put the right people in the right place, put them in charge, give them the authority, responsibility, have a budget for gosh sakes on the first of the year, and then figure out how to execute and go fast. And I tell you, when you have threats, like I talked about earlier, that are going faster than you are, it's not just because it's the right thing to do, it's because it's for the security of this nation. We have to go faster, and we're not. And it is frustrating the heck out of me. And I ask everybody in this room to make sure that as you go forward wherever you work, in industry, in the Air Force, in the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, wherever you happen to work, one of our things that we all have to do is talk about going faster than our adversaries and look at the threat. And if we're not going faster than the threat, then it's wrong. I don't care what it is, it's wrong if it's not faster than the threat. So I've said enough there. Next chart. Holy cow. U.S. Strategic Command. A global warfighting command. The most powerful command in our nation. We do amazing things every day. And we focus so that we are ready to respond to any threat that requires our capabilities. That's who we are. I'll be looking forward to taking your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, General Hyten. That was great. I certainly learned a lot. Well, there were several questions, as you can imagine, many of them thematic. And so let me take off with one of the charts you just briefed. And there were several questions about, and let me summarize it this way. We've been told all week that the Air Force is too small for its mission. We've talked a lot about the lack of resources, the age of our aircraft, the lack of pilots, the lack of maintenance folks. We don't have a budget. We're looking at another CR. And the basic question is, given all those things that the Air Force is wrestling with, how can we go fast?
So the, I don't want to answer a question with a question, but I'll start that way. And so the corollary is, how can we not go fast? You know, when we were, and we are still the most dominant military on the planet, we are. And I think we've become spoiled by that. And we've become spoiled about space operating in a benign environment. We've been spoiled about not really countering an air threat for really a long, long time. We have airmen that have really never experienced an air threat in combat. We have all those capabilities, but we have adversaries that are looking at it different. So we went through a period where we went through what was called capability-based development. And capability-based development says kind of define what you want that can deal with any threat that's out there, and we'll just kind of build that capability. We'll take our time, and we'll get to that capability. People forget what came before capability-based development. It was threat-based development. Everything was about the threat. Everything was about responding to the threat. So I'll tell you, General Spencer, if we don't change our attitude and we just talk about capabilities and we don't talk about what we need to respond to the threat, nothing will change. Nothing will change. But if people take the threat seriously, and oh, by the way, why is China building weapons in space? Because they think it's a cool thing to do, or they love to expend their gross national product on those kind of weapons? No, they're doing it to challenge the United States. That means we have to respond. Why are they building hypersonic glide vehicles? Why are they testing it ahead of where we are? Because they think it's just a cool thing to do and it's fun? No, they're doing it to challenge the United States, to challenge our strategic deterrent. That's why they're doing those things. We have to get back to everything based on the threat. And if we don't start talking about the threat in public, in open, and what it really means, nothing will change.
Thank you. A lot of questions, as you can imagine, on the strategic triad, ranging from, do you still believe in a strategic triad? I already know the answer to that is yes. So let me shift some of the other questions along those lines, really dealing with recapitalization. And the basic thrust of the questions are, you know, all three legs of the triad need to be recapped. Can we afford it? And if so, or if not, can we afford not to?
That's right. And you said it, you can't afford not to. Because again, if you go back to the question about do we need to modernize, do we need a triad, it has to start from the threat. And the threat starts with Russia. And you need to be able to make sure you can deter Russia in any strategic environment. And the strategic capabilities that Russia has right now, with long-range aviation, mobile ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, fixed-base capabilities, and missile defenses, when you put all those capabilities together, the triad that we have is essential to being able to deter Russia. And you heard the Secretary of Defense this morning talking about why that's the most important mission. So I won't repeat what he said. But if we're going to do that, it's about countering the threat. So if you want to say, I don't have to build and I don't have to modernize everything, the only way to do that is to change the threat. Which means that's the job of the State Department and others to figure out how to get to a different world where the threat is not the same. But as long as the threat is out there, our job as a military is to deter that threat, which means if you look at a threat-based perspective, we have to have a ground-based strategic deterrent. We have to have a bomber. Oh, by the way, we have to have cruise missiles along with that bomber. Anybody that's an aviator in this room, if you only have a bomber that can attack one target at a time with a gravity bomb, that is not the most effective deterrent for an adversary. You have to have that. You have to have a submarine, and you have to have a submarine with modernized capabilities, and you have to have modernized nuclear command and control, and you have to have modernized weapons. You have to have those capabilities unless the threat changes. So if the threat doesn't change and this country doesn't do anything about the threat, then that is what is absolutely essential, and you have to have it, and there's really no way to argue around it.
Thank you. As a COCOM commander, you've had the opportunity to step away from the Air Force. and sort of look at it from the outside looking in. Having done that, is it your opinion that the Air Force is doing a good job to prepare its officers and NCOs for joint duty?
So, no. I don't think we're doing a good job. And you got to understand, I love the Air Force. I really do. I'm an airman at my core. That's, when I look at myself as a professional, that's who I see. I see an airman. And I love the Air Force desperately, but we don't build people, we don't prepare people for joint duty until really the general officer levels. The general officers that the Air Force nominates to come to Stratcom are spectacular. They're really the top of the litter, and all the other services is the same way. But the lower you go in rank, we don't prepare people well to go into the joint community. People don't understand the joint community. They don't understand joint operations. We have to teach them that when they come to our command. And we are, but when you don't do that, that puts us at a disadvantage, us as airmen in this case, as a disadvantage with other services. Because other services are focusing on doing that from the major perspective forward. They really strategically think about that. And I think as an Air Force, it's our responsibility to make sure we provide the joint force, not just with the quality people, because the quality is not the issue. It's the training. We don't really train people effectively for those joint duty assignments. And so when they come to Stratcom in particular, and I've talked to other combatant commanders, we have to build that up. And it shouldn't be that way.
Okay. Can you discuss the threat of EMP attacks on the U.S. and what are we doing to counter that threat?
So the reason I'm laughing is that during my confirmation hearing last, whenever it was, October, I guess, a year ago now, I got that question from Senator Wicker from Mississippi. And he said, so General, have you read the book 1 second after? And I said, no, Senator, I haven't. He said, well, let me tell you about the book. So he gave me a 30-second description of the book, which is about EMP pulse going off, and it's a novel written. So he gave me the 30-second description. He said, so now give me an assessment of the book. And so guess what? I went and read the book. My crack staff, when I got home, had, hey, you ought to read this book. And it's a book about EMP. But I've looked at EMP since I was a young officer, young engineer, because I was building systems to respond to EMP. An EMP pulse is a very dangerous threat, and it's a realistic threat. It's something that would basically, if you're not nuclear hardened, it will basically shut down any digital computer that is operating in the range of the EMP. So if you set off an EMP, a high altitude burst EMP, basically every light in this hotel is going to go off, every computer is going to go off, every cell phone is going to go off, and every automobile in the parking lot will no longer work. That's what an EMP does. Therefore, we have to be able to respond to that EMP. And so I was asked, is Stratcom ready to respond to an EMP attack? And the answer is yes, because we have nuclear hardened satellites, nuclear hardened command and control shelters. We can be able to respond to that, et cetera. But our nation as a whole has not really looked at EMP. We've not looked at the critical infrastructure that could be damaged by EMP. And we need to kind of take a step back and look at that entire threat. Because it is a realistic threat. You can use a nuclear weapon. The most likely way to create EMP is with a nuclear weapon. And you don't have to actually kill anybody directly with a nuclear weapon to create that horrible EMP pulse. So we have to think about what that means and how we would respond to it. And we haven't really stepped up. But if there's any good news in that story, it is Stratcom will be able to respond to that kind of attack because our capability to survive through that kind of attack.
Sure. You mentioned your first priority was deterrence, and one of the questions was, can you discuss or describe what deterrence looks like in space and cyber?
So there is no such thing. You know, I actually, for whatever reason, it took me a long time to come to that realization. Deterrence is about an adversary. It's not about a place. You don't deter space. You don't deter cyberspace. It's about an adversary. So take space. If something bad happens in space, there is something really bad going on this planet somewhere with an adversary. There's some significant conflict going on in this. And so the first thing I'll do Say the conflicts in the Pacific, and we suffer something going on in space and cyber. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to talk to Admiral Harris, who's in the Pacific, and find out what the heck is going on there. So what we want to deter is our adversaries. We want to deter our adversaries from carrying a war into space, which means we need to use all the tools of deterrence to influence the adversary not to take the war into space. Now, the other thing to think about is deterrence is about deterring strategic attack against our country and our allies. That's what deterrence is. People think deterrence is about eliminating weapons. No, deterrence is about making sure weapons aren't used against our country, because we'll either impose such a cost on the adversary that they can't stand it, or we'll deny the benefit they want to do because we can defend ourselves so well, and we communicate that credible capability so that everybody understands what that is. And we're going to have to do that with our space capabilities, our cyber capabilities, our conventional capabilities, our nuclear capabilities. That's what 21st century deterrence really is. It's all of those pieces together to deter our adversaries, because if you just think about space and you just think about cyber, you're not thinking about what is motivating our adversaries to go that way. So deterrence is about an adversary, not a place.
Okay. In the spirit of total force, do you ever see a reservist or guardsman taking on senior positions in a combatant command?
Well, I personally have no trouble with that. The smartest person on nuclear execution in my command is Major General Rick Evans, who's a guardsman from Lincoln, who I asked him the other day, how many nuclear exercises have you done? And he doesn't know, but it's either in the hundreds or thousands. He can do it. He understands the nuclear capabilities of this country backwards and forwards. He's the most significant advisor, trainer that we have in the command. He happens to be a guardsman. I don't know about you guys, but when I've deployed, I honestly don't know who a guardsman or reservist is when I deploy. I really don't. I've been shocked multiple times at 1, 2, and 3 stars that I've worked with forever when all of a sudden they tell me, no, I'm a Alabama guardsman. What? How long have you been a guardsman? Well, pretty much my whole career. Really? I didn't know that. One of the strengths of our service is that it is a total force. And so my belief is you should pick the best person for the job, and I don't care what uniform they wear, what component they come from, where they are. It's the best person for the job. If it's Navy, it's Navy. If it's Guard, it's Guard. If it's Reserve, it's Reserve. I don't care. I just want the best person for the job. And nobody I know cares what component you come from. They just care that you are competent and you can lead. That's all they're worried about. So I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay. This is an interesting question. How do we balance national missile defense, in parentheses, ballistic missile, cruise missile, against emerging threats, against the cost and the destabilizing impact on our deterrence relationship with Russia and China?
So there's 2 or 3 books written on that subject that I would recommend to you as you walk through. So the concept of missile defense is an unbelievably complicated concept. And cost is a critical piece of the piece as you come into it. But let me just talk about missile defense and the overall strategic deterrent, and then I'll walk into it. I won't actually give you a dissertation or recite a book. I'll just give you the big pieces. So probably the biggest piece is 3 elements of deterrence. I went through them a while ago. Impose cost, which is our nuclear capability. That's the ultimate imposition of cost on an adversary to prevent them from acting. Number 2, deny benefit. Guess what our missile defenses do? They deny the adversary the benefit from an attack, because if North Korea launches a ballistic missile at the United States, we will shoot it down. We will. So whatever benefit they have in their calculation that think they're going to achieve because of that, they will not achieve it because the missile defenses will shoot it down. So what is the value proposition of that capability to deny the benefit to North Korea? To me, it's almost infinite. Whatever you have to pay to do that, you have to pay. But in the overall construct of missile defense, one of the things that we have to do in the overall deterrent construct is we need to figure out, so how much and what kind of missile defenses do we need? As long as we're on the interceptor train, we need the most effective interceptors we can, and we need to be looking at new technologies like directed energy in particular, to figure out how to change the cost equation to put more of the advantage on the defense rather than the offense. We always need to be looking at that. We need to figure out how to integrate the other domains into that equation so we understand what is the best sensor suite. And right now, it's a ground-based focused sensor suite, and I believe that it should be a space-based sensor suite that enables the missile defense, because in the long run, it's actually cheaper. Because I don't know how many islands in the Pacific and islands in the Aleutian and middle of Alaska we're going to build giant billion-dollar radars that only protect one thing. When you can put capabilities in space, yes, that cost an equivalent billion of dollars, but cover the entire planet, that then enables that. So you got to change the cost equation as we go through that by looking at the entire enterprise. So it's about the fundamentals of deterrence. And denying benefit is extremely important, and that's what missile defenses do, so that has to be part of the architecture. But when is the last time you see somebody in academia, in a think tank, write an integrated deterrence story that talks about the integration of offense, defense, space, cyber to create the effect? I don't know of any in the United States that integrate those together, but I can point you to some very good Chinese articles. So we need to think about it differently.
Okay, General Hyten, one final question. And one of the great things about this week is, as you can see, we've got a sea of blue uniforms, and one of the things we're really happy about this year is a lot of those uniforms were young folks, young lieutenants and captains, young airmen and young NCOs. And almost every forum we've had, there's been questions about work-life balance. And you have a very busy job, a very responsible job, some would say stressful job. How are you able to balance that with your responsibilities to the nation, with your responsibilities to your family?
So the smartest thing I ever did was marry Laura. Because, yeah, those of you know her, I just heard some applause. That's the smartest thing I ever did. Because guess what? If I was left to my own devices, and I can tell you that's the way I was as a young officer, and actually my first 10 months in Squadron Command, I was that way. I was in the office when I was a first-year squadron commander, probably 16 hours a day, at least 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I was in the ops center on mids. I was in the dorms in the mornings. I was everywhere because I thought that's what I had to do, and I was like so excited to be a squadron commander. That's what I wanted to do, and Laura was just beating on me, and then there was 3 master sergeants that worked in my squadron, and the 3 master sergeants saw me frustrated one day, and they were the 3 senior NCOs in the organization, 250-person squadron, 101st Term Airmen. The commanders in here can understand the challenges that come with that kind of organization. And so they came into my office and said, "Sir, we can understand your frustration. We can see it. Why are you frustrated?" And I said, "Man, I feel like we're doing good as a squadron, but I can't get through to the airmen. I'm trying everything I can do, and we keep having these discipline problems. I can't get through to them. I know every one of them by name on the dorms. I'm doing this, I'm doing that." And they looked at me and they said, "Sir, why didn't you just ask us to take care of the airmen? That's our job. Why don't you just be our commander? If you would just be our commander, I think we'd all be a little bit happier." You know, those 3 master sergeants, Jim Patton, Robbie Robinson, God, just amazing, amazing folks. They looked out for me, and then my wife watched me to make sure I wasn't there. So I made a commitment that day that I was only going to be a commander if I was a commander. I wasn't going to do the NCO's job. I wasn't going to do the DO's job. I was just going to do my job. And then Laura said, "Why don't you come home for dinner every night?" And so every night for dinner, I came home. I would leave the office at 5:30. Now, every day at Stratcom that I'm back at home, I actually go home roughly 6 o'clock at night, 1800. I go home and I have dinner with Laura. Now I have a skiff in my basement, and I have... All right, so I'm cheating a little bit there, but I do go home and I have dinner with my family every night, and I have dinner with my wife. And you know the amazing thing about that story? Jim Patton, Robbie Robinson, Bill Brokel, those 3 NCOs, the last year I was in command, I was getting home for dinner. I was seeing all my kids' soccer games. Unless something was, happened to spin up. I was going to school plays and all those things. Yeah, I still got called in the middle of the night and all those things that happen, those things happen. But the second year I was in command, my squadron set every operational record the Air Force Base Command had ever seen. We won the Guardian Challenge competition as the best. We won the Henry Award as the best squadron in the Air Force. And I was getting home every night at a reasonable time. And my family life was a lot better. And Laura was a lot happier, which meant I was a lot happier. And I remember that to this day. And to this day, I fight to get out of that office. Because the other thing that happens, if you don't leave the office, all your folks don't leave the office either. And they don't have balance in their lives. And you know what? As busy as my job is and as crazy as this world is, if something really bad happens, guess what? I'm fully connected. They're going to call me. And guess what? That stack of stuff on my desk, I'll be able to get to it tomorrow. And if it's really important, somebody in the staff is going to come to me and say, "Sir, we need to do this right now." And I'm going to do it right now. So you can maintain balance in the most difficult jobs. And if you had talked to Laura, she will tell you that the job I'm in right now is the most stressful job I've ever had. Every time there's a launch out of North Korea, I don't know where it's going to go. And every time we're on it, and whether it's the middle of the night or wherever, we're all over it and we understand what it is. And we're working with all the other combatant commanders. It is a difficult challenge to have the responsibility for all the strategic nuclear weapons of the nation. It's a significant challenge to understand that if the nation has its worst history, it's going to come down to me to explain that to the President of the United States so we can figure out what to do. Through one military aid that'll translate what I'm saying to him. It's a challenge to have all those things, but the best thing that keeps everything together is I come home and Laura's there. And I know not everybody is married and not everybody gets to know somebody like Laura, but I'll tell you one last story to tell you the power of a spouse, and then we'll finish. Because I think it's a good story to end the formal conference on. So I was working for the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a one-star. And it was General Jim Cartwright, former Stratcom commander, United States Marine. And I'll just let you know, I swear to God, he never slept. He never slept. And my standing meeting with him was 05:45 on Monday morning, and I wasn't the first on the calendar. And I was going like crazy all the time, and I was TDY away from my wife. And then I got PCS order, so I actually kind of PCS'd in place. But I started out as TDY, and then Laura had to do the move all by herself. And I went to General Cartwright and said, "Can I go back and help with the move?" And she said, "Okay, you get a day and a half." So I went back for a day and a half. The mover was delayed. I actually left Laura as the moving truck pulled up. Bad moment. All those things are happening. Everything's going wrong. I come back. I'm working for General Cartwright. Laura does the move all by herself. She does everything all by herself. Everything is all set up. She does that all by herself. And then about a week later, all is done. And she picks up the phone. She calls me and she said, "So, John, I understand you got a tough boss and you got a tough job and you're doing important stuff. But here's the deal. I'm tired. I'm going to take a vacation. I'm going to Cancun. I'm taking a date. I'd like it to be you." So I don't care how scary your boss is, because the next moment I had a chance. I went in and told General Cartwright, "I'm taking leave, and here's why." And he looked at me and said, "That's a good reason. Have a good week in Cancun." So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
John, we want to thank you for showing up. I got to tell you, it's unfortunate that your colleagues couldn't join you, but I guarantee you, for me and for the audience here, we're certainly glad you came. And you alluded when you started out by being surprised, or you said it was impossible for you to end up in this job. I got to tell you two things about that. One, those of us that know you and have worked with you are not surprised at all. And two, those of you that have known and worked with you are glad you're in that job. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Great job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.